So this webinar is about working cross-culturally, teamwork in a global world. I know for many of us now, we work with colleagues that are from other places, whether they're remote colleagues that are based in another country or whether they're right next to us. Also, cultural differences can be as different as being from Kansas and being from Minnesota. I think this webinar is extremely relevant in today's world, and I'm excited to see so many people are interested in it. Cool. So I'm going to let you know a little bit about who I am and then what Common Genius is and why we're doing this webinar, and then we'll get started. So my name is Samantha Carlin. I am the community director and the director of the expert community for Common Genius. I have a master's in law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School. My focus is on foreign policy and supporting women entrepreneurs. I've also worked for the Hillary campaign and for Ashoka. But I'm not the star today. So what is Common Genius? Common Genius is the world's first expert marketplace. It's a knowledge marketplace. So whether you're looking to build your business or grow your career, we basically have experts who can help. Everything is done online through our video chat platform, which is really cool. So basically you find an expert, you ask for a meeting time with them, you book a meeting, and then you meet them online through video chat. I really like Common Genius because I think it increases access for people. You know, we don't have to be living in Silicon Valley to get access to Lamya or New York City or one of the tech hubs. We can be in South Africa and be able to get expertise from somewhere across the world. And I think that that's a huge reflection on our globalized workplace. So welcome to Common Genius. We're very excited because we just became live. Lamya, can you see the website?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just make sure it's working. So basically you go online, you can search experts by category. We have experts from a variety of categories, mostly business professionals that have like at least 10 years of experience. Some incredibly amazing people on here that just want to give back. Go to whatever category you're interested in. So business development and partnerships would be one. Then you can see who is there. And then, so let's just choose Cheryl. You can look and see their profile more fully. And then you can request to book a meeting with them. You have to put in your location so we know your time zone. And then you can book a meeting with the expert. So that's Common Genius. And then you would, they would accept your meeting time or they would propose a new time. And then if they don't, then basically you'll schedule a convenient time for the two of you and then meet online via our video platform. So I'm happy to show you Common Genius. Terry can see the image and the handouts, but not the sound. Terry, you might want to go up to like your little thing on the top of your screen with like a microphone and a camera and just make sure that the computer has access to your audio. Also, Lucy is moderating this discussion. So if you are on technical issues, you can also go into private and then press, go down to admins and then press Lucy and then message her and Lucy can help you try to figure out what the technical issues are. Okay. So that's Common Genius. And now the slides are gone. Great, so we're really excited. Common Genius just went live. We have an international team that's been working on it for about 2 years, and so we're super excited that it's live and ready for business. So Lamya is one of our Common Genius experts. If you're going to be tweeting during this conversation or Facebooking or Instagramming, here are our handles, and there's also Lamya's. So who is Lamya? So Lamya is one of our Common Genius experts. She's a behavioral consultant and an accredited NLP Master-Practitioner. And she has over 14 years of experience in North America, Europe, and the Middle East and North Africa in talent management. She has worked for companies as prestigious as Bertelsmann, Orange, Groupon, Google, and Microsoft. So we're really excited to have Lamya here today. And without further ado, I'm going to let Lamya take it away.
So hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm happy to see that we have people from all over the US so far. The other thing is I love how everyone is talking about the weather, and it seems it's cold everywhere, even here in California. So let's get things a little bit warmer here. And we will start with discussing our goals, what we will be learning. So we're all coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, and nowadays our teams are often geographically spread. So you can be in the US and have a team in Japan or Korea, or literally in Europe and Germany whatsoever. And people are quite different. Even when you're from the same culture, we have some challenges when we are interacting with each other. So the first thing that we will do is that we will understand how the cultures are influencing not only the individual, but the team's dynamics, especially in a team that is composed from members who are from different cultures. The second thing is the communication part, which I love the most, because the thing with communication is we always think that it happened when it didn't. Just because you said something, it doesn't mean that it was processed by the other person, even within the same culture. So we will learn about the different conversational styles, what people are actually saying, using their words. And finally, we will learn about how culture and our environment shape our behaviors and attitudes, and what are the different behaviors. If you have any questions along the way, I have what I call the questions parking. So it's the little Q&A with the red dot that you see there, and you can just type in your questions and we can go along the way. I'll be asking questions during the webinar. So please feel free to answer right away or speak up if you would like to talk, like what Thierry did. Just raise your hand and we can go ahead. Perfect. So I think we can move on. And this is something that I've learned quite early in my career, that the best way to be understood is to actually understand other people. It's really important. The better way to establish rapport and get the best out of a situation is to understand what the other person really means, what they really think, and not see it from our own perspective, which is the easy things to do. And sometimes, especially within teams, it's easier to assume things because we think it's going faster, whereas it's not. So our first subtopic would be dynamics in cross-cultural teams. And we will see it through the Gerd Hofstede cultural dimension model. So based on this model, we have 6 dimensions of value perspective. And it provides a great starting point for understanding what drives people from different cultures and how we can adapt our working and communication styles to work better together in a cross-cultural team. So the first dimension is the power distance index. So for all dimensions, you have the high side of the dimension and the lower side. As you can see here, you have the characteristics for the high power distance index, which are cultures with very centralized organization. They have complex hierarchies. The status is quite important, and there are also larger gaps. The low PDI, it's more relaxed, I would say, and everyone is considered as equal. And see, to give you a pretty good example, the Japanese leader, they take green pains actually to avoid being seen as forceful. So they are generally respected because of their age, their status, but they still have to be competent or they will be sidelined. In Italy, authority is based on the personal qualities and having the ear of the owner rather than the technical competence itself. So if you're outgoing, you have authority, the technical skill set doesn't matter that much in Italy. Where Spanish leaders, for example, they are thought to be able to solve any problem. Whatever comes their way, they need to be able to solve it. But the Swedish leaders, they're not expected to have the answer. So based on what I just said, where would you put, for example, the Spanish leaders and the Swedish leaders. You can go ahead and type your answers in the public chat. So far, I'm seeing the right answers, which is great. So some of the tips within a high PDI organization or culture, or if you have people from that culture, just know that they will pay a lot of attention to the leader status. And be aware that if you're working with a team that is on a high PDI culture, but you will have to go to the top to get the answers. On the other hand, if you're dealing with low PDI team members, you can delegate as much as possible, and ideally you need to involve everyone in the decision making who will be directly affected by the decision. Now we're moving to the next dimension, which is how people are collectivist or individualist. Same thing, high IDV, they're usually place and show a lot of respect to people's time and their need for privacy, personal space, and they love challenges. And if someone is working really hard, they are expecting a reward. The low IDV would be more people are working for intrinsic rewards, meaning that what's really important for them is to be satisfied about what they're doing and how they're interacting with other people. And the individual is kind of suppressed because the most important thing is maintaining the harmony between the group members. We will see something later on another slide where friends, depending on the subject, is between the two on certain topics. So some of the tips, if you're dealing with high IDV, you need to praise and reward individual accomplishments. You don't mix work life with social life too much. So there is a very strict boundary setting in high IDV cultures. And it's really, really important that you can encourage people to express their own ideas and attend to actually what they're saying. On the low IDV, what's going on is avoid giving negative feedback in public. And when I say in public, I know that a lot of offices now have glass around them so you can see everything that's going on. So when you're given negative feedback, it needs to be somewhere that is very isolated. And the other thing is saying no can cause loss of face unless it's intended to be polite. So you always need to be very careful with the low IDV cultures because there is a whole nonverbal communication that is going on the behind, and certain things are expected, but we'll go a little bit more into details later on. Any questions so far? So, Angelique, the culture versus the personality type. The personality type can be universal, meaning that it's not necessarily defined by the culture. The only thing where you can see the tie is some culture will foster certain behaviors. So let's say if someone is an introvert, they will be displaying the same characteristics, whether they are from, the United States or Japan or from Norway. But their behaviors will be different because the behaviors are shaped by what our environment is expecting. Who we are is who we are. How we behave, it's a different story. And we will go through it. And Susan, yes, this is Hofstede's work. Barbara, see, balance is something that is very subjective. What I would consider as a Moroccan being balanced is not necessarily what someone from Australia will consider as balanced. That's why we always need to keep our mind open and try to see things from another perspective. Balance is always subjective. So the third dimension is masculinity. Sorry, my French will be coming up from time to time, so this is a great exercise for the topic. So on high MAS cultures, you have strong egos. Pride is something that is really important. The status is almost vital. And money and success and social status are also very important. Low MAS, it's relationship oriented, it's about harmony within the group, and it's more focused on the quality of life. So in masculine societies, the roles of men and women overlap less, and men are expected to behave assertively. So what I would ask you is, can you think about culture and write names who would be high MAS or low MAS? Yeah, Benjamin, Denmark has a low MAS. That's true, Monica. Caribbean cultures, some of them have low MAS. So some of the things with high MAS, long hours culture, Angelic, it depends. Canada, it might be, it depends if you're on the French side or the English side. Okay, now we covered both sides. So high MAS, people are motivated by precise targets and by being able to show that they achieved them, either as a group or as individuals. So this is something you need to keep in mind when you're dealing with team members who are coming from a high MAS culture. The low MAS, on the other hand, the success for them is seen to be more likely achieved through negotiation and input from all levels, and they need a lot of flexibility. So that's also something that you need to keep in mind when you're working with low MAS. And now we're moving to the uncertainty avoidance index. So this one, it refers, sorry about that. So this dimension refers to how well people would cope with anxiety. As you can see, high cultures, people, they are allowed to show and express their emotions if necessary, and the context doesn't matter. So if you're angry at your workplace, you're allowed to show your emotion and express your frustration. Whereas in low UAI cultures, there would be more, it depends more on the context. So if it's a private context, yes, you can express your emotions. If it's not, then you need to keep your emotions for yourself. So this is, and I'm sure it happens for people who work in teams with members from different backgrounds. Sometimes the discussion will get animated and you think that some people shut down because they're not expressing how they're feeling. It's just not in their culture. And what would happen is you keep asking, are you okay with this? Or tell us how you feel. And people would still not express their emotion. It's not that they don't want to, it's just that it's not part of their culture. So when you're faced with that situation, the best option is once the meeting is over, just take them aside or schedule another call if they're not in the same physical place and say, okay, this is the discussion that has been going on. I would love to have your input, and let them express their feelings. Angelique, is this also gendered though? The research has shown that actually it's not. you see slight differences that are not significant enough to be to make a difference between women and men. Angelique, I hope that this answered your question. So we'll be moving to the long-term versus short-term orientation. So, as you can see, the long-term orientation cultures, what often would happen is how people refer to the time horizon in the society display. So countries with long-term orientation, they are very pragmatic, modest, and more thrifty, where in the short-term oriented countries, people will be more focused on principles, consistency, wisdom, and truth. So if you're dealing with a long-term orientation person or team, one of the recommendations would be to avoid talking too much about yourself, because the focus is more on the group, or it would be seen as bragging. It doesn't talk to them, and people are more willing to compromise. So this might not be seen from or clear to people from the outside, but it's really true for the long-term orientation societies. On the short-term side, you need to praise yourself to be taken seriously. If you did something, you just need to express it and say, this is what I achieved throughout my career, and it won't be seen as bragging, but it will be seen as something, it's something that needs to be done. And you need to empower not only yourself, but all the others. Any questions so far? The last dimension is indulgence versus restraint. And so countries with high IVR, they allow or encourage free gratification of people's own drives and emotion. So yes, you can go enjoy life, have fun. Where in societies with low IVR score, there is more focus on suppressing the gratification and more of regulating people conduct and behavior. There are a lot more stricter social norms. So this is the tradition. So those are the countries who traditions are pretty actually ingrained, and everyone live by the tradition. So there is a norm, and everyone needs to fit in there. So can you think about high restraint and high indulgence countries and type in your answers? Germany is definitely high. Okay, so some of the advices when you're dealing with team members who are from cultures with high indulgence, prioritize feedback, coaching and mentoring, and flexibility between work and social life. It's really important for them. The high restraint, and I learned it the hard way, believe me, when I say avoid making jokes when you're engaged in formal sessions. Sense of humor is something very national, and in high restraint cultures, it's not welcomed unless you get to know the people after a certain time. So to close the subtopic of the team's dynamics, here are a few tips and tactics. So gather information. Information is scattered all over the place, but not only information that is related to your work, but also about the culture of people who are in your team. If they're from a different country, gather information about the do's, the don'ts, and things like that. Be very flexible. And one of the most important things is make sure that everyone has a voice. Certain culture people are not used to speak up or speak. So you need to encourage them to speak and share their ideas, what they have. Because sometimes they are brilliant and they have great ideas, but if they're not encouraged, if there is not a safe environment for them, or if they don't know that it's okay to do so, they will just keep it for themselves. And finally, over-communicate. There is no such thing as, okay, I say this, it's clear. It's clear for you, it's not necessarily clear for the other person. So if you say it once, say it twice, 3 times, 4 times, make sure that the message went across. It's not because we said something that it was processed on the other end. So Susan, you asked an example of high indulgence culture. Norway would be one of them. Okay. So, and the last thing on the communication part is you need to communicate clear vision, the goals, and the directions to the team in language that can be understood by everyone. And in terms of who, what, when, and how communication will take place between the different team members. So, Susan, would you mind to put your question for the why Norway is a high indulgence culture on the QA? We will go back to this after we're done with. Thank you. So, on the communication side, we have 8 conversational styles. And due to the fact that not everyone speaks the same language, other differences cause problems in multicultural teams. And I personally call the differences in the conversational styles the recipe for conflict or the recipe for disaster. So people, they have different way of interacting. British people and American people, they tend to interrupt with comments of their own. Sometimes they will even finish other people's sentences. In the Mediterranean culture, everyone speaks at once. And by contrast, in Finland and Russia, for example, serial conversation is the norm. People take turn speaking and everyone listens before commenting or answering the question. So imagine if you have people from Finland with Mediterranean people. The Mediterranean people will perceive that the Finnish not answering as or not talking at the same time as they're not actually engaging in the conversation, where the Finnish people will see that the Mediterranean people are being very rude because everyone is speaking at the same time and they're being interrupted. So to give you a quick overview about the different conversational styles, so the direct is what we have here in the US. It's a direct style. It includes explicit messages, and the speaker is expressing clearly their intentions. The indirect, it's often ambiguous message, so you need to interpret what has been said. The elaborate, and this is what you would see in the Middle East, Japanese culture also. They tend to be more elaborate in their conversation because they would use figurative language, proverbs, metaphors. So you need to read between the lines. The system conversational style is straight to the point, and they tend also to use long pauses in their conversation because they're processing what has been said, but the answer will be very short and to the point. Then you have the conversational style based on the context, and this is something that you will see in the Indian cultures, Japanese, Chinese, but also in countries like Algeria and Morocco, where they use the social roles or the social status to adjust the conversation style. So the status are taken into account to help decide of the level of formality be engaging in. The personal conversational style, those are cultures that is less formal and focus on the individual and disregard the status difference. So that would be also something that we find here in the US. In France, for example, Switzerland. And the instrumental one, it's very goal-oriented. It's people, when you're talking with them, they're stating first, hey, today, the outcome of this conversation will be this. And finally, the affective one, or the emotional one, is the communication that is sensitive. So messages are often implicit, with meanings that can be found in the nonverbal codes. Any questions so far? So indirect, Angelique, would be just instead of saying, hey, I want this, or let me think about a better example, because that would be a more direct approach. The indirect, people will say something and you need to read between the lines. It's very ambiguous. It's, for example, I don't know, I cannot go eat before I'm done work. So you can understand several things from here. The person probably, if they're from a high context culture, what they will tell you is, yes, Samantha, that would be more accurate. What they would do is they're expecting you to offer to go and get them food, but they won't tell you, hey, I need food. On the elaborate side, the same thing would be said, but using a metaphor or a proverb. In Arabic, for example, there is this saying that say, an empty stomach is not working well. So they would just say that, and the other person is supposed to understand just from that saying, from that proverb, that, hey, you need to go get me some food because I need to finish work and I cannot go get it myself. So does this answer your question, Angelique? Okay, great. Yeah, I love that reference, Angelique. Absolutely. So, Susan, the good resources. So there is a pretty good research that has been published by Emily. She's a professor at Princeton, and I think it can be sent out with the material after the webinar. Okay, so now we will speak about the higher and lower context culture. So for affective, it's usually people who are using a lot of words or predicates that are tied to the emotion. When they are talking to you, they will be like, I feel this, or I don't feel okay about, you know, this topic or this topic. And their nonverbal cues are more expressive than other people. And we can, I saw that Samantha converted to Q&A, and we can just go back at it. So the high context culture and the low context culture, they were first introduced by Edward T. Hall. And this amazing book that I recommend to everyone, if you get to read it, it was published, I think, in 1976, and it's called Beyond Culture. So in high context cultures, communication, it's largely implicit. So the relationship and the context are way more important than the actual words, and therefore very few words are necessary. In the low context culture, the message is communicated almost entirely by words. I saw earlier that someone said that, and that was Marco, I prefer to receive instructions straightforward. So that would a low context culture. You use words, it's very clear, it's straight to the point. Where in high context culture, it's more, the hungry example, I'm telling you something and you go figure it out. So here we have examples of high and low context cultures, as you can see. So, and Thierry, as I mentioned, France is in the middle with England and Italy. They're getting there, and it depends on different topics. This is just to give you an idea about how things. Yes, the US is, they're more on the low side, simply because they use very direct and simple messages. It's the schedules are very important. The space, the privacy is very also important. And I think that you can see it. Okay, because I'm seeing if there are questions that are related to each other. So I feel like those are people, it's their personal conversational style. So that's the other thing. That's why communication is so complicated, because you have the environment, you have the person, but why is the US a low context? The individual is at the center of the society. The group doesn't take over. Okay, and what would be my take on West African countries? It depends. I'm Moroccan, so we're in the middle, right where Spain and Italy is. Senegal, for example, I know it's a very high context country. I hope that this answered your question, Casey. But the tradition in West African countries is something that is really important, and it's a very ancient culture too. So the context and the social status matters a lot. So I would put it on the high context side. So Scully, you say self-centered society. The US, it's the individual before the group. Yes, so Marquisha, they express a need. See, for example, the fact that they say, I need more training, they're expressing a need, and that's very direct. That's why they are more on the low context culture side. So, and here are a few tactics to communicate effectively in cross-cultural routines. So, the first or the most common challenge is that we always see things as we are, and not as what the person is trying to say. So to reduce misperception, always assume differences until similarity is proven. You don't have common references often, so you cannot just assume that, hey, we're the same. The first rule would be, we're all different until we know that we have a common background. And put your focus on on description mainly, rather than interpretation or evaluation. When something is said, make sure that this is what the person really meant. So, active listening. We all struggle to really listen. And often, and I'm sure that everyone will recognize themselves, when someone is talking, we're already thinking about what we're going to say next. So just make sure that when they're speaking, be there. When I say be there, not at 90%, not at 80%, but 100%. Listen first, think about your answer. It's perfectly fine to think, to take 2 or 3 seconds to think. But when someone is talking and you're thinking about, oh, this is what I need to say, sometimes you're missing important cues or words that are really important to the other person. And so the message is completely missed. Empathy is something that is really important because it's the only way that gets people to open up. And it's the only way to communicate effectively. If there are barriers, if the other person doesn't understand that, hey, I can go and talk and I will have someone who will understand what I'm going through, what I'm trying to say, they won't do it. So showing empathy is very important. You cannot be in the other person's shoe. You cannot go or feel exactly the same way, but you can show understanding. So the other thing is avoid closed questions. You know, sometimes what we would say is, hey, do you want to carry on or shall we stop? Our brain will literally process only one, and then you might get an answer that was for the first one or the second one, and you wouldn't know. So when you're in cross-cultural teams, it's one question at a time. And finally, make sure also that they won't say yes or no. They need to elaborate, because in some culture, for example, it's very difficult or embarrassing to answer and say no. So you will always get a yes, even if the real answer is no. That's why you need to keep the question or ask your question in a manner where they need to elaborate their answer. So here we will speak about Western culture and Eastern culture. So our behaviors are often shaped by the way we grew up, by our values, and by our environment. So the Western culture looks at the individual performance and achievement. So members of the Western culture, like in the US, they don't need to be strongly attuned to who else is in the room when they speak, because there is no strong sense of the hierarchy. On the Eastern cultures, it's more about the group. So the focus is on the welfare of the group, and everyone is expecting the group members to think of their group identity before their individual identity. So as a result, members of Eastern cultures, they are more acutely aware of who's in the room, so they can give deference to those whose position demands more respect, or to shift their communication style because of who is in the room. So as I'm moving forward, can you please think about examples of Western and Eastern cultures and type it in. So, behavioral preferences. We all have behavioral preferences that are called the natural tendencies. And I will give you just a small exercise. If you're left-handed, sign with your right hand if you have a pen and paper just next to you. And if you're right-handed, sign with the left hand, and then type in the way you felt by using the hand that you usually don't use. So, the goal for this exercise is quite simple. Our behavioral dimensions and tendencies are something that we cannot see. And every day we shift our behaviors. So we have what we call the core behavior, and we have what we say the public self, and finally there is the way that we see ourselves. In an ideal world, our core behavior, self-perception, and public behavior would be all the same. But hey, nothing is perfect. So we all shift. And when you do that with your behavior, sometimes you're not as efficient as you can be just because you're not using your strength. So what you see over here is the 4 behavioral dimensions. So we have the red part is the dominance, the yellow one is the influence, the green one is the stability, and the blue one is the cautiousness. So this model is called the DISC model. I don't know if some of you are familiar with it or not. So everyone has the 4 behavioral dimensions, except that we don't have the same intensity, we don't have the same primary behavioral dimensions. And it's often related, some behavioral patterns are related to the culture. So on this side, if you give me just a second. So here, the high dominant people and cautiousness people, they're very task oriented. The high influence people and stability people, they are more people oriented. So when you're working in a team, you need to pay attention to different behavioral dimensions because I put in the associated behaviors, and I'm sure that when you read this, you can recognize some of your colleagues or some people who are working for you. And there is communication styles and work frames for each behavioral dimension. So that's why it's really important to pay attention to how people are behaving. They don't have the same expectations. They don't need to be spoken to the same way. And I will always remember what one of my mentors told me. She had what she called the golden rule. You know, that's what our moms used to tell us. Treat people like you want to be treated. And then she had the platinum rule, which is treat people as they need to be treated. The expectations of a high D person, high dominant person, are not the same expectation as a high S person, for example. And there's different combinations. And unlike the MBTI, because there was something about the personality type, the MBTI, there are no, actually, it's who you are. This is something that shifts. Who you are is who you are. It doesn't change after 12 years old because the personality is fixed, unless you're experiencing something, a life-altering event. But your behavior shifts on a daily basis. Just think about it next time that you will dealing with something. You will see that the way you behave in the morning or with a certain person is not the same as you behave in the evening. The way you behave with your family and your friends is not the same way that you behave when you're with your team or with certain of your team members. So it's always important to keep in mind that there are different behaviors, behavioral tendencies, and it's really important to attend to them. Finally, we have what I call the third element. When you're interacting, there is you, there is the other person, and finally there is the situation. And this is at all times and under any circumstances. Even the situation requires a particular behavioral dimension to use. So you need to recognize what is the best behavioral dimension to use so there is a win-win situation. Let's say you're a high C and you need to convince a high dominant person, and this is a decision-making situation. You need to keep in mind that the situation requires influence, but also directness. And the other person is very fast-paced, so you need to present all the aspects in a very brief manner with facts, so you're comfortable to, as a high C person, to make the decision. Any questions? Actually, we're running out of time. Okay. So finally, we have the last subtopic, which is the values. And how are values formed? So our values are formed throughout our life. Usually by 21, our value system is ingrained and it's not changing. So they influence our interactions, decision-making, and they're usually shaped by different internal and external influences that will include family, tradition, cultures, people who are working with you. So the imprint period is from birth to age 7. This is when you begin establishing the template for what will become your own values. The modeling period is 8 to 13, and the template is sculpted and shaped by the parents, the environment, the society, the teachers, and the experiences in person's life. And finally, we have the socialization period from 13 to 21. And this is when we fine-tune our values through personal exploration and comparing and contrasting with other people's behaviors and values. So this is why values matter. The values matter because it affects the individual character and behavior towards others. The relationship between values and behavior is very intimate because the value creates the construct for the appropriate actions. So it's really important to know your work values and even your, I don't like the word core values because it doesn't mean that some values are more valid than others, but it's really important to know your values because it helps clarify what you might want to avoid in the workplace, but more importantly, what you really need in the workplace. So those are a few questions that you can ask yourself to identify your own values. And you need to understand them. So once you start asking yourself this question, you will see that patterns will start showing up. And from there, you can come up with a list of what's really important to you and what needs to be provided and where your values need to be met. As in recognizing other people's values, talk to them on one-on-one or just simply study their behavior. For instance, team members, they might say, hey, I value teamwork, but it's only the person who will actually stay late to help someone else that will demonstrate that teamwork is one of their values. Our last slide is workplace value examples. So I just picked 4 different values, which are quite important usually in the workplace. And you can see that for each one, I have put the focus, the outlook, the goal, what they fear, and the work style. And I'm going to hand it over to Samantha because this was our last slide and we will go to the Q&A shortly.
Fantastic. So you might have seen a pop-up offer come in the bottom left corner. So Lamya is available for one-on-one coaching through the Common Genius platform.
Yes, absolutely. So I have a very particular way of working, meaning that unlike other coaches, my goal is to actually get people where they need to be within 18 months. And often we do it way before. I had people who I worked with just for 3 months because they were transitioning, they wanted the promotion, they want to switch careers or whatsoever. So all my work start with behavioral assessment, so we can have a baseline that we will be working from, and we can measure the progress that we're making. So as an individual, we will put your values and at the center of our work. You will learn a lot about yourself, how it's influencing your interactions. You will also learn how to recognize other behavioral tendencies and how to adapt your communication and your behavior in order to get to where you need and want to be. And with that, when you do that work, automatically you will see improvement in the way you communicate, in the way you manage people, in the way you feel about yourself, which is quite important. Often people, they just need someone to push a tiny door. Everyone has a lot of potential, and sometimes we just forget about it. And what I do is support you in remembering how amazing you are. It happens to everyone. It happened to me. And I think working with a coach was the best decision that I made a few years ago. I'm not going to say that it was over a decade, but almost. And for teams, what I do is I design very specific workshops with a lot of work to work on team cohesion. Often I also will give recommendation about what kind of people need to be added to the team. And mainly when I'm called in for teams, it's because there are trust issues or there is conflict. And 90% of the time, it's just communication issue that kind of was ignored for months or for years. And it imploded at some point. So I work also with teams.
Great. So for teamwork, if you're interested in having Lamya come to your team or to your workplace, just email me, Samantha@commongenius.com, because we have a special teamwork rate specifically for Common Genius members. Just to give you an idea of what Lamya's clients had to say about her. These are people from different ethnicities, cultures, backgrounds, countries. Everyone thinks Lamya is amazing. She is an outstanding executive coach offering clear recommendations, personal authenticity, and is passionate. Her DISC assessment is critical and essential for any founder or CEO. I won't build another startup without her. That's from Clarence. Lamya is an amazing coach. Her expert approach has given me a profound understanding of myself and others to be a better leader. Her natural love for people and her passion for her work shows with every interaction. She holds you accountable to your goals while providing the nuanced feedback and resources for achieving them. And that's Tanal's. Common Genius is a knowledge marketplace where you can search for experts online and book video sessions with experts that you normally wouldn't be able to access. Again, follow us on our social media to keep abreast of the next webinars, of our features. We're going to South by Southwest, and you're going to have cool parties. You want to stay in touch with us. I promise we're doing really awesome stuff. If you are interested in applying to be an expert, as I mentioned, typically our experts have upwards of at least 6 years of experience in their field. Typically, they've either been published or they've worked with some pretty high-profile people. So if you're interested in applying to be an expert, you can just click on that link, and I'll also post that link as well. Or Lucy, can you just post that link quickly in the chat? I do, before we're going to answer a couple questions since we're over time, not too many, but I do want to let you guys know about the upcoming webinars. We're having a webinar on Valentine's Day. Apropos is called Leading with Love. Incredible venture capital lawyer who was a lawyer for 20 years and is now a pioneer of benefit corporations and creating corporations that are accountable to environment and society as well as revenue generating. He's incredible. And then I'm not sure, I think like February 28th, Matt Brazil is a specialist in Chinese intelligence. So he's going to talk about how China collects foreign intelligence and hopefully make us all a little bit more savvy about protecting ourselves from infiltration. Great. So let's take maybe 1 or 2 questions since we're over time. Okay, so we do have a question from Suzanne from earlier. She's asking about the third element. Is the third element the pillars of cross-cultural communication?
So the third element is the situation itself. So when we're engaged in an interaction, we often think about what we want out of it. We have another person who's thinking about what they want out of it. But we forget that the situation itself requires a certain behavior. So imagine if you have someone from Morocco and someone from Japan. Our view of the situation itself would be different, because as a Moroccan, what I would see personally is, hey, I need to make a decision. I would just go with my guts. I would follow my instinct. And the other person, they will see decision-making situation as being, oh, you know what? I need to have all the details, all the facts, who my decision will affect, will my manager approve? So if we're interacting and we need to make that decision together, we can be, you know, working on it until tomorrow morning, unless we see the situation from a neutral standpoint and say, okay, a decision needs to be made. We need this, we need details, but not too many of them. But also we need to think about how comfortable we will be with making that decision. So this is what I meant by the third element, is the situation itself. And we often forget about what the situation requires. We're focused either on ourselves, on the other person, or on something else, but we forget about the context and the situation. So I hope that this answered your question.
Super helpful. And then Angelique wanted to know an example for the effective conversational style.
So I think that I answered this question when I said it's people who would use a lot of non-verbal cues. And when I say they use emotional predicates, yeah. Yes, I already did.
Great. Awesome. Well, we're going to wrap up now. If you have any more questions for Lamya, you should book a one-on-one with her, because that was, even having a master's in foreign policy, that was like incredibly informative and helpful. And I feel like there are a million tools that have been talked about today, including the book by Edward Hall. It was Beyond Culture. Is that what it's called?
Culture.
Beyond
so
Culture.
There's another book that I always recommend, and it's called The Emotions of Normal People. It was published in 1929 by Marston, who's the same guy who created Wonder Woman, by the way. And he was a very renowned psychologist at Harvard. And it's an amazing book. It's really something I recommend. With Beyond Culture, those books, they changed my life and how I interact with people. So,
can you say the name of it again, Lamya?
Actually, I'm typing in the chat. So we have emotions. And Angelique, de rien, thank you for giving me the chance to speak at least French a little bit.
Another book that's also great is called The Culture, that can give you a little bit more of information on this. And then the last book recommendation that I have is an interesting hypothesis by a professor at the Fletcher School. It talks about how he posits that there are three cultures in the world: cultures of honor, cultures of achievement, and cultures of joy. And he was one of the people that worked on the Poll research studies, which are all about cultural values. So I'm also going to throw that book in the chat.
So
A World of Three Cultures.
So Angelique, to answer your last question, that's the other thing. One of the first things that I mentioned is always ask questions and gather information. We're all unique. And I know it for a fact because I've administered over 1,000 DISC assessments. I've never seen the same graphs twice. So we are truly unique. Ask questions. As kids, we answer about 300 questions a day. Once we grow up, we stop asking questions because, hey, we should know. We should know data, but when it comes to people, the best way is always to ask questions and to attend to the answers.
Spoken well, Lamya. Great. So I want to thank Lamya so much and give her since no one else can hear, but no one else can clap out loud. I'll like to clap for a ton of incredibly valuable information. We're so happy to have you as an expert on Common Genius.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. And then to all of the people that came, thank you. Gracias, merci, toda raba, whatever other thank yous I don't know. Dankeschön, gracias from Marco.
I'll say it in Arabic too.
I don't know how to say it in Arabic, so thank you, Lamya.
No. And thank you everyone for attending the webinar, and have a great day.